I used to think there was nothing sweeter than hearing your grown child say, "Mom, you deserve this." Just 5 words, but they stitched together every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every year I spent putting someone else first. So when my son Arthur called me from his sleek office in Chicago and said those exact words, "Mom, you deserve this," I didn't question a thing. Not a single, solitary thing. I didn't ask why he suddenly wanted to celebrate my 72nd birthday amidst the stark, ethereal beauty of Reykjavik. I didn't wonder how he'd remembered my old whispered dream of seeing the northern lights dance across an Icelandic sky. A dream I'd buried deep under decades of bills, broken appliances, and the quiet weight of expectation. I just smiled, a tremor in my voice, and whispered, "You really mean it." And when he laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and said, "Of course, Mom. It's time someone took care of you for once." I believed him, foolishly, completely. That phone call came while I was pruning the rose bushes behind my little lake house in Lake Haven, Michigan. It was late March, and the frost was still clinging stubbornly to the soil, a thin, icy shroud. But I remember the way my heart bloomed at that moment, a sudden fragile warmth against the lingering chill. Arthur said he'd already booked the flights. "Business class, Mom. You won't believe how comfortable it is." He made it sound like a gift, a grand gesture of love. And I, in my naive hope, accepted it as such. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron, the rough canvas doing little to soothe my trembling fingers, and sank onto the porch steps, letting the weak spring sunlight warm my face. "Reykjavik," I whispered aloud to no one but the sparrows hopping around my bird feeder. They were the only witnesses to how much it meant to me. I hadn't left the country in decades. I hadn't even left Lake Haven in over a year. And yet, here was my son, planning a once-in-a-lifetime trip just for me. Or so I thought. Over the next week, I slipped into a familiar rhythm, a flurry of preparation. Not because I needed to. Arthur had assured me he'd handle everything. But old habits, like old scars, die hard. I unearthed the suitcase I hadn't used since Arthur's college graduation, its leather still smelling faintly of mothballs and forgotten dreams. I aired out my blouses, each one a memory of a different younger me. I carefully folded scarves and even bought new compression socks just in case. A ridiculous detail perhaps, but it felt like an act of faith. I spritzed lavender on my neck pillow like it was some kind of lucky charm, a shield against the unspoken anxieties fluttering at the edges of my perception. I even went to the bookstore, picking up 2 small gifts for my grandchildren, handmade bookmarks and an illustrated book about Norse mythology. I tucked them into my bag with a quiet, hopeful smile. It felt in those moments of anticipation, like everything I'd ever given all the overtime shifts, the lonely holidays, the quiet sacrifices, was finally being returned in one beautiful, overdue gesture. My sister Susan called during the week to check in. "Isn't Arthur still swamped with work?" she asked, her voice laced with a gentle skepticism I chose to ignore. I laughed, a light, airy sound, because even she sounded surprised by his sudden generosity. "He said he'd be working remotely while we're there," I told her, my voice bright. "But the trip is all for me." He remembered how I used to talk about Iceland when he was a kid. There was a long pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken questions. "Well," she finally said, her tone carefully neutral. "Maybe he's growing up," and I, desperate for that narrative to be true, agreed. Maybe he was. The day before the trip, Arthur flew into town to join me for dinner. It was supposed to be my birthday celebration, just the 2 of us, a quiet affair at the cozy Italian place I loved, where the red sauce tasted like home and the Chianti flowed freely. But Arthur, ever the modern man, changed the plan last minute. "I already booked a spot," he said, his voice clipped. "Modern place, great reviews." We ended up at a sleek new restaurant downtown, all cold metal and glass and harsh fluorescent lighting. Cold, empty, just like the space between us. His wife, couldn't make it. The kids were at a recital. He barely looked up from his phone, his thumbs dancing a frantic silent ballet across the screen. I wore the emerald blouse he once said made me look like a lucky penny, a small, foolish attempt to bridge the growing chasm between us. He didn't notice. I tried to fill the suffocating silence with small talk, asking if he was excited, if there were any places he wanted to see in Reykjavik. "It's your trip, Mom," he muttered, eyes still glued to the glowing screen, dismissing me like an inconvenient fly. Halfway through the meal, he abruptly stood up. "Work call," he said, already halfway across the sterile room. He disappeared for almost 2 hours. 2 hours. I sat there alone, sipping lukewarm tea, the clinking of cutlery from other tables, a mocking soundtrack to my isolation. I tried not to feel like a placeholder, a prop, in a scene I didn't understand. When he finally returned, he acted as if nothing had happened. He paid the bill, the transaction as impersonal as everything else. Back at home, a prickle of unease finally nudged through my stubborn optimism. I asked if he could print the hotel confirmation and flight itinerary for me, just in case my phone battery died during the trip. A flimsy excuse, even to my own ears. "It's all digital now, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "Relax, I've got it." That should have been a screaming red flag, a blaring siren. But I choked it up to generational differences, to his busy schedule, to my own overthinking. I reminded myself that Arthur was under pressure, that he had a lot on his plate, that this was still a generous, loving thing he was doing for me. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the moon reflect off the lake, a silent sentinel. "He's changing," I whispered to the glass, to the moonlight. "He really is." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I hadn't failed as a parent after all. Now, if you had told me back then that this quiet hope, this fragile belief, would become the insidious start of a revenge story, I would have laughed. I was a mother, not a fighter. I didn't believe in revenge. I believed in grace, in forgiveness, in giving people the space to become better versions of themselves. But sometimes, grace is mistaken for weakness. And sometimes, people don't grow up. They just grow better at hiding their true intentions. Looking back, that week felt like a final performance. One last lullaby before the curtain dropped. Before I realized that Arthur wasn't bringing me to Reykjavik to make memories, he was sending me away. And he wasn't planning a celebration. He was setting a trap. And I walked right into it. A willing, unwitting participant in my own exile. By the time we got to the airport, the silence between us was thick enough to choke on. A suffocating blanket of unspoken words and simmering resentment. Arthur barely spoke during the car ride to the airport, his eyes glued to his phone, thumbs dancing nonstop across the screen. I sat beside him, fingers fidgeting with the hem of my cardigan, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The morning had started strangely. He rushed through breakfast, barely touching his eggs, his usual hearty appetite gone. I tried to lighten the mood with an old story about his dad Thomas. Something funny about the time Thomas got lost hiking and blamed the compass, a story that always made Arthur chuckle as a boy. But he barely reacted now, just a flat, "Huh," and back to tapping on his phone. "I'm just tired, Mom," he said, when I finally asked, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Work stuff. Don't worry." But I did worry. Every fiber of my being hummed with it. At the airport curb, he popped the trunk, handed me my suitcase, and said, "Text when you land." No hug, no photo, not even a smile. He didn't walk me in, just drove off like it was another Monday, his silver sedan disappearing into the stream of traffic. I stood there, suitcase handle in one hand, passport clutched in the other, watching his car vanish. I told myself not to read into it. He'd been stressed. He always got like this before big projects. But there was a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. It was my birthday, and it felt like a chore to him. A task to be completed, checked off a list. Inside the terminal, I checked in and went through security with plenty of time to spare. Still, my mind kept replaying that awkward dinner the night before. The restaurant was cold, not just in temperature, but in soul. Walls of steel and glass. No warmth. No music. He said it had great Yelp reviews, but it felt like a place designed to make you eat quickly and leave. He hadn't even looked up when I walked in. I wore the emerald blouse he used to say made me look like a lucky penny. Back when he was in middle school, he'd reach for that blouse on laundry day, press it against his cheek, and say, "Smells like home." I doubt he even noticed I had it on. I kept the conversation light, desperately, pathetically light, asking if he had favorite Reykjavik spots, or if we could see the Blue Lagoon, maybe take a boat tour of the fjords. "I'll be busy," he said, his voice clipped. "It's your trip. Just enjoy it." I nodded, pretending it was okay, pretending I didn't feel like a background character in my own celebration. At one point, I reached across the table and asked if he'd printed anything out. Hotel confirmation, maybe a schedule. My phone wasn't reliable lately, I lied. "Everything's digital, Mom," he said, not even looking up. "Relax. Relax." The word echoed. I'd heard it before. So many times. Usually right before something went wrong. When he forgot to pick me up from the hospital. When he overdrew my account by accident. When he canceled Mother's Day brunch because he got stuck at work but posted photos at a golf course the next morning. I should have asked more questions. Should have pressed for details. But if you're a mother, you know how that goes. You don't want to nag. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You tell yourself, maybe it's just you overthinking again. You tell yourself, silence is trust, and yet part of me was screaming. Have you ever had that moment when your gut knows something your heart doesn't want to accept? Let me ask you this. If your child acted cold, distant rush through your birthday like a to-do list, would you speak up, or would you do what I did and smile through it, praying you were just being sensitive? I still wonder. Was it love that made me quiet, or fear of hearing the truth? That night, I couldn't sleep. The lake house, usually a balm to my soul, felt suffocating. I paced opening and closing drawers, packing and repacking my suitcase. I checked my passport 3 times, even though I knew it was there. I set my alarm early, too early. I just needed the morning to come. When Arthur finally knocked a sharp, impatient rap, I met him outside with my suitcase already zipped. He didn't say, "Happy birthday." He just opened the trunk, loaded the bag, and got in the car. We drove in silence. At the gate, I turned to say thank you, to say I loved him, to say this trip meant everything. But he was already pulling away, window rolled up, eyes back on his phone. I stood there for a long time, even after he was gone, the chill of the Michigan spring biting at my exposed skin. I wondered if maybe I'd done something wrong. Had I overstepped, asked for too much, expected more than he could give? But deep down, a quiet, insistent voice, a truth I had long suppressed, finally surfaced. I hadn't asked for anything. All I'd ever done was give. And somehow giving had made me disposable. When I stepped off the plane in Reykjavik, the air felt different. Crisp, cold, yet surprisingly sweet, almost like the promise of spring itself had been bottled and uncorked just for me. I remember smiling to myself despite everything, the awkward goodbye, the choking silence in the car. I told myself maybe this was the turning point. Maybe once Arthur joined me tomorrow, things would feel right again. That feeling didn't last long. The airport was clean and bright, buzzing with travelers speaking in languages I didn't understand, a stark foreign landscape mirroring the disorientation swirling within me. I followed the signs toward baggage claim, rolling my carry-on, clutching my purse close to my chest like a lifeline. I took out my phone to check the hotel confirmation. Arthur said he'd emailed me. The screen flickered. 70% battery when I left Lake Haven. Now it blinked red. 2%. I swallowed the rising unease. I'd printed nothing. Arthur said I didn't need to. He had everything handled. Just enjoy the trip, he'd said. My phone died before I could even open the email app. I stood there frozen for a second, unsure where to go. I checked my wallet passport check. One credit card, the one Arthur said he'd activated for international use. No cash. The $200 I always kept tucked behind my ID was gone. I must have left it behind in my rush. No hotel info, no address, no maps. I sat on a bench near the taxi line and tried to breathe shallow, ragged breaths. No panic, I told myself. You've traveled before. You're smart. You can figure this out. You raised a child, survived a failing marriage, outlived a husband, and worked double shifts through flu seasons and back pain and Christmases alone. This is just a bump. I dug into my carry-on, hoping I had scribbled something down. I found the boarding pass. On the back in my shaky cursive, I had jotted a name Arthur had casually mentioned, Hotel Frost, Reykjavik. I waved down a taxi, pointed to the writing and the driver. His face kind nodded. We drove for about 20 minutes through quiet streets lined with colorful, whimsical houses and narrow shops. The city was beautiful, like something out of a postcard, a fairy tale landscape, but I was too tense, too tightly wound to appreciate it. I clutched my bag the whole ride, telling myself everything would be okay once I got to the hotel. But it wasn't. At the front desk, the young woman behind the counter tilted her head politely when I gave her my name. She typed into the computer, then again, slower, her brow furrowed in concentration. I'm sorry, she said in soft English. No reservation. I blinked. Try under Arthur Vance. He booked it. She checked again. Nothing. No email, no payment, no booking. She turned the screen toward me, a screen full of empty grids. My name wasn't there. That's when the panic began. A cold, creeping tendril of dread. I asked if she could call the airline to check my return flight info. Maybe there had been a mistake. She nodded, picked up the phone. I waited on a little velvet bench near the elevator, staring at my shoes, my heart thudding in my chest like a trapped bird desperate to escape. She returned, her face pale, a quiet sympathy in her eyes. There is no return flight booked, she said quietly. I sat very still. No return flight. He hadn't just forgotten. He hadn't overlooked something. This wasn't a mistake. Arthur had left me here. On purpose. A birthday gift that doubled as a goodbye. The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The bellhop behind the counter looked over with concern, but I shook my head, a slow, disbelieving gesture. I'm fine, I whispered, but I wasn't. I walked out of the hotel, sat on a nearby bench near a row of cypress trees, and stared at nothing. My mind was empty and full at the same time. Every memory I had of Arthur played on a cruel, endless loop: his first fever, his school plays, the peanut butter sandwiches I used to cut into little triangles because he said rectangles made him feel sad. And then came the memories I didn't want. Him missing birthdays, snapping at me when I reminded him to take his vitamins, rolling his eyes when I asked about his work, the way he once said, "You worry too much, Mom. It's exhausting." Exhausting. That's what I had become. Not someone who raised him, sacrificed for him, believed in him when no one else did, but a burden. I thought about the sapphire brooch I pawned to pay for his SAT tutor. The wedding ring I sold to cover his first semester when his loan didn't come through. The second job I picked up at the hospital gift shop so he could have spending money in college. The years I went without, just so he could have more. And now I was disposable. He hadn't even waited a day before making me vanish. My throat tightened as a new terrifying thought took root. Maybe he hadn't wanted me to come back. Maybe he hoped I'd get so lost in translation in foreign laws and systems that I'd end up forgotten, institutionalized, silenced, a problem solved. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed to hold something, anything, to keep myself from unraveling. And still, through all the pain, one feeling rose higher than the rest. Shame. Not for what he did, but for how long I had let myself believe it was love. A love so absolute it blinded me. The hook for the next chapter. My phone was dead, my credit cards useless, and my heart was a raw, bleeding wound. But then a flicker of light in the bleak Icelandic twilight, a small, unassuming cafe radiating an impossible warmth. It was there, amidst the scent of roasted coffee and the quiet murmur of a foreign tongue, that I would uncover the chilling truth, a truth far more sinister than simple abandonment. A truth that would ignite a fire within me, a fire that had been dormant for far too long. I found the little cafe by accident. My feet were sore from walking the foreign streets of Reykjavik. My head throbbed with hunger and confusion, each beat a silent accusation. Tucked between two bookstores on a quiet side street, its awning was faded, a whisper of a forgotten summer. But the warmth inside, the gentle hum of conversation, and the rich scent of coffee was the first thing in hours that didn't make me feel utterly invisible. The barista, a young man with kind eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair, didn't speak much English, but he pointed patiently to a worn menu and led me to a corner table. They had Wi-Fi. The words, though silent, were a balm to my soul. I nearly cried. He handed me a charger and an old tablet, its screen slightly cracked, but still functional. It took a few tries, my hands still trembling, but I finally logged into my Gmail account. I hadn't used it in ages, only kept it for old photos and online receipts, a digital attic of forgotten memories. But the moment I was back in a cold, calculated clarity began to cut through the haze of panic. I started digging. I searched for the hotel email Arthur swore he'd sent. Nothing. No confirmation, no bookings. I checked my bank account. Blocked. My credit card? Declined. The cold dread intensified, a tightening band around my chest. And then I opened my inbox. There at the top was a thread I wasn't supposed to see. Arthur had accidentally forwarded a chain from my niece Chloe to me weeks ago. I clicked, thinking it was something harmless, a family update, a recipe perhaps. But what I saw knocked the breath out of me, a physical blow to the gut. "He's starting to worry," Chloe had written. "She forgot to pay taxes last year and repeats herself a lot. Maybe it's time someone stepped in." Arthur replied, "Exactly. I've been looking into power of attorney. I think she's slipping, but I want to handle it quietly." Another message, this time to my brother-in-law, Walter. "She booked 2 dentist appointments in the same week. Totally forgot. That's not normal." I sat there blinking at the screen, heart pounding, the gentle hum of the cafe fading into a distant drone. I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd made a second appointment because the hygienist was booked out for 6 months. The taxes? That was an IRS mistake. I had the corrected form in a drawer back home, a tangible piece of paper against their web of lies. He wasn't concerned. He was preparing a case. Stroke by stroke, he was painting me as unstable. Not because I needed help, but because he needed control. Power of attorney. Access to my house. My finances. My very name. He wasn't waiting for me to grow old or unwell. He was writing the ending early. And the trip. The Reykjavik trip. It was a setup. A meticulously crafted trap. He created the very crisis he needed to prove I was incompetent. No phone, no money, no way home. Then he could swoop in, rescue me, and claim legal guardianship. I wasn't supposed to survive this alone. I wasn't supposed to figure it out. I was supposed to fail. I was supposed to disappear. I leaned back in my chair, the smell of espresso suddenly too strong, too bitter, like acid on my tongue. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from a cold, pure, steady rage. A fire long banked, now roaring to life. I had spent a lifetime protecting this boy. From bullies, from his own bad choices, from the harsh judgments of the world. And now, he was trying to erase me. not just move me into a home or close my bank account, but rewrite who I was, a confused, dependent, failing old woman. He wanted the house, the Lake Haven property I'd worked 30 years to pay off. He wanted the insurance I never told him about, the quiet savings account I built from leftover shifts and coupon clipping. He wanted it all, and he thought he could get it because I was quiet. Because I'd always said yes. Because I didn't fight back. But something shifted in me. Sitting at that cafe table with a cracked tablet and a lukewarm cup of tea, something old and buried came up like fire through frozen ground. I remembered what I was before I became a mother. A woman who'd survived a marriage full of silence. A woman who rebuilt her life after her husband Thomas passed. A woman who never once asked for recognition but deserved it all the same. I wasn't done. I wasn't gone. And I wasn't going to let him write me out. Not yet. Not ever. I opened a new email and typed in one name, Dan Hayes, my old lawyer. The one who handled Thomas's estate, the one who looked me in the eye at the will reading and said, "Eleanor, you're the kind of client I never worry about because you know what you want." Subject line: Prepare power of attorney challenge. Immediate action. Body returning ASAP. Arthur's building false claims. Need injunctions in place? Call me. I hit send. And for the first time in days, I felt my spine straighten. My hands still trembled. My chest still ached. But there was something inside me that steadied. He thought he'd buried me in a foreign country. But I'd found something better than a way out. I'd found the truth. And I planned to bring it home. The hook for the next chapter. My lawyer Daniel picked up on the first ring, his voice calm and steady in the pre-dawn Minneapolis quiet. He listened, he understood, and he acted. But even as the legal wheels began to turn, I knew the true battle wasn't in courtrooms, but within the echoes of a trust I had once built with open hands and an open heart. The memory of my unwavering belief in Arthur, nurtured through years of small kindnesses and profound sacrifices, now felt like a painful bloom about to be crushed. Dan Hayes, didn't ask a single question when he picked up the phone. I had simply said, "It's me," and he, a rock of calm in my swirling chaos, replied, "Eleanor, I was wondering when you'd call." It was 3:20 a.m., his time in Minneapolis, but he was already pouring coffee and pulling files, his voice steady, a tether to reality. That's the kind of man he was. He asked where I was, if I was safe, what I knew so far. I told him everything slowly, clearly, even the parts that made me feel stupid, like not printing my itinerary or letting Arthur handle all the details. Daniel didn't flinch. "You're not stupid, Eleanor," he said firmly, cutting through my self-reproach like a sharp blade. "You were being a mother. He was being a manipulator." I hadn't cried since the hotel, but that line, that simple, profound truth, cracked something loose inside me. A tear finally escaped, tracing a hot path down my cold cheek. I asked him what we could do. "Plenty," he said, his voice laced with a quiet confidence that was more potent than any false reassurance. Daniel worked fast. Within hours, he filed an emergency motion with the county court to freeze all financial activity involving my estate. He also sent a stern letter to Arthur's attorney of record, a phantom figure I hadn't even known existed, warning him that any attempt to access my bank accounts, property deeds, or medical files would be considered preemptive fraud. It wasn't revenge, he clarified. It was defense. Legal cold, unyielding defense. Daniel told me to stay put, to conserve my energy, and to keep documenting everything. "I'll handle the fire at home," he promised. "You just need to get on the next plane back and be ready to stand tall." He added, "I've seen sons like him before, Eleanor. They always underestimate the woman they came from." I hung up the words echoing in the small Reykjavik cafe and stared at the chipped ceramic cup on the table. The steam had long faded, but I hadn't. I was still here. My fingers, which had been trembling uncontrollably for days, found a new, unfamiliar steadiness. Later that afternoon, I called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring, her voice a burst of warmth and worry. "Eleanor," she breathed. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm all right," I said, the lie feeling less heavy now. "But I need you to do a few things for me." I gave her a list, my voice crisp, focused. "Go to the house. See if anything's been moved. Look for mail from any attorneys or real estate brokers. Call the gardener. Ask if anyone's been walking the perimeter. And most importantly, water the roses." A pause, then I added, my voice hardening with resolve. "Evelyn, I'm coming home, but not the same way I left." There was silence on the other end, a beat of stunned quiet. Then, steady as always, she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but Arthur doesn't know who he's dealing with." Neither did I. I realized the truth washing over me with a surprising clarity. Because I'd forgotten who I was. I wasn't the woman who sat quietly in the back pew anymore. I wasn't the mother who kept excusing silence, who accepted being treated like an old coat in the closet. I was the woman who raised a son while working night shifts and balancing a checkbook down to the last penny. I was the one who clipped coupons, pored over insurance plans, and made a dollar stretch like it had magic. I was the one who buried a husband and built a life again alone. And now, I was building something else. A line. A boundary. Not out of spite, but out of survival. I booked my flight for the next morning, a one-stop journey through Seoul, then straight to Minneapolis. The airline had one seat left. I took it without hesitation. The barista at the cafe, with his kind eyes, helped me call a taxi. He didn't speak much English, but when I told him, "Home," he smiled kindly and bowed, a gesture of quiet understanding. That night, I stayed in a tiny hostel run by an elderly couple who barely spoke English, but who gave me hot tea and rice porridge and a quilted blanket that reminded me of home. The woman pressed her hand gently to mine as I checked in, and something about the kindness in her eyes made me feel like I was being stitched back together, piece by piece. I slept for 9 straight hours, the first truly restorative sleep in what felt like years. When I woke, the sun was already up, painting the Reykjavik sky in soft hues of pink and gold, and for the first time in over a week, I didn't feel lost. I brushed my hair, put on my earrings, and tied my scarf just right, a small, defiant act of self-care. I looked in the mirror, meeting my own gaze, and said out loud, "Let's go." The flight was long and full of turbulence, but it didn't rattle me. What shook me, what truly resonated deep within my bones, was the feeling of momentum. Like my body finally remembered what it meant to move towards something instead of away from it. I didn't eat much on the plane, just sipped water and read through every document Daniel had emailed me. He included a short, powerful note. "Stand tall. You're not asking for your life back. You're claiming it." As the flight descended into Minneapolis, I stared out the window and saw the frozen Lake Superior, the shimmering expanse I'd lived beside for nearly 4 decades. It looked different now. Not just colder, but quieter. Like it had been waiting for me. Waiting for me to return, changed. At baggage claim, I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I simply stood up, straightened my coat, and walked out like a woman with nothing to prove and everything to protect. The snow was still fresh on the ground when my taxi pulled into my neighborhood. I hadn't seen it in 2 weeks, but it felt like years. The street looked the same, quiet suburban, trimmed hedges and lazy mailboxes. But my house had changed. It wasn't the color or the shutters or the wreath on the door. It was the lights. Bright white LEDs had replaced my warm yellow porch bulbs, the ones I always kept soft, glowing like a whisper saying, "Someone's home." That gentle, inviting glow was gone. As we neared the driveway, I saw it. Cars. 3 of them. One was Arthur's silver sedan, parked crooked, just like he always did when he thought rules didn't apply to him. The other 2 were rentals, newer, sleeker, with out-of-state plates. My stomach tightened. He wasn't just staying there. He was entertaining. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow subtly furrowed. "This the place?" I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice firm, laced with an iron certainty. "This is mine." The hook for the next chapter. I stepped out slowly, feeling the frozen gravel crunch under my boots, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. Daniel had asked me to wait until morning. "Let me file everything first," he'd urged. "Let the courts work in your favor." But I knew my timing was perfect, because through the front window, bathed in the cold, unforgiving glow of the new LED lights, I saw Arthur raise a glass of champagne, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the true shattering was about to begin. I stepped out slowly, feeling the frozen gravel crunch under my boots, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. Daniel had asked me to wait until morning. "Let me file everything first," he'd urged. "Let the courts work in your favor." But I knew my timing was perfect, because through the front window, bathed in the cold, unforgiving glow of the new LED lights, I saw Arthur raise a glass of champagne, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the true shattering was about to begin. The living room, my living room, was lit up like a showroom, all harsh brilliance devoid of the soft, inviting warmth I had cultivated for decades. In the center, surrounded by two well-dressed strangers and a notary I didn't recognize, stood my son, laughing, smiling, celebrating. He held a manila folder, waving it like a victorious flag. "It's all wrapped up," I heard him say, his voice carrying clearly on the crisp evening air. "Signed, sealed, delivered." One of the women leaned forward, her voice a hushed, almost conspiratorial whisper. "You're sure she's not coming back?" Arthur laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound. "Come on, she could barely keep track of her doctor appointments. She thinks this trip was her idea." That was it. I'd seen enough. The rage that had been simmering beneath my composure ignited hot and fierce. "Now let me ask you something. If you walked up to your own front door and saw your child celebrating your erasure, what would you do? Would you bang the door down? Would you scream a primal cry of anguish and fury? Or would you do what I did and walk in like you never left?" I opened the front door. No knocking, no hesitation. Just me standing framed in the doorway, letting the sudden rush of heat from the house hit my cheeks like a physical slap. The room went silent. Glasses stopped mid-air. Eyes froze wide with shock and disbelief. Arthur's mouth fell open, a silent gasp. The manila folder slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering to the polished hardwood floor. "Mom!" he managed, a barely audible whisper. I stepped in fully, deliberately shutting the door behind me with a soft click that resonated like a thunderclap in the sudden, cavernous silence. I let my suitcase rest by my feet, a silent companion. My gaze swept slowly around the room, my furniture, my rugs, the lamp Thomas and I bought on our 20th anniversary, its gentle glow now swallowed by the stark LEDs. All of it being used as stage props in a play I was never meant to see, a grand illusion of my disappearance. "Didn't expect me so soon, did you?" I said, my voice low, steady, a silken thread of menace. Arthur stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. I thought you were still in Reykjavik." I said, my eyes locking onto his, unwavering. "And now I'm not." Just then, Daniel appeared behind me, right on cue, holding a thick folder of papers. "Mr. Arthur Vance," he said calmly, his voice ringing with authority in the stunned room. "You are hereby served." He began to list the documents, each word a hammer blow. "Emergency injunction, restraining order, asset freeze, and revocation of any pending power of attorney filings." One of the men in the room, sharp-suited and pale, stood quickly. "I think we should leave," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I watched them gather their bags, muttering apologies, looking anywhere but at me. And Arthur. He stood in the middle of it all. Still. Silent. No champagne now. No arrogant grin. Just a pale face and twitching hands. Why are you doing this? He finally whispered, his voice thin, reedy, utterly unlike the confident man who had planned my exile. I tilted my head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. You mean protecting what's mine? He looked like a child again. Not the grown man who had meticulously planned my disappearance. Just a boy caught red-handed, shocked that his mother wasn't as disposable as he'd hoped. I stepped past him, walked into the kitchen, and ran my hand along the cool countertop. Still smooth, still mine. Then I turned back. You can leave now. He didn't move. Daniel stepped forward, his presence commanding. You no longer have legal residence here. Any refusal to vacate will be considered trespassing. Arthur looked at me one last time, his eyes wide, confused, but with a flicker of something new. A dawning realization of the wall he had just hit. You'll regret this, he said, his voice laced with a desperate defiance. I met his eyes, my own gaze unwavering. No, Arthur, you will. He grabbed his coat, a clumsy fumbling movement, and walked out, slamming the door behind him with a resonant boom that vibrated through the quiet house. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't lonely. It was peace. A profound, sacred quiet. I picked up the champagne glass he'd left behind, still half full, and dumped the sparkling liquid into the sink. I wiped down the counter, set the thermostat to my usual 70 degrees, and walked to the porch. With a flick of a switch, I turned the new cold LED lights off, replacing them with the soft, familiar yellow glow of my old porch bulbs. Then I sat down in my favorite armchair, closed my eyes, and breathed. I was home. The hook for the next chapter. The house was mine again, bathed in the gentle yellow light of my old bulbs. But peace, I was quickly learning, wasn't a sudden arrival. It was a slow, deliberate reconstruction, a quiet ascent from the profound hollow Arthur's betrayal had left behind. The immediate shock of confrontation was over, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness that demanded to be felt, to be understood. This new quiet was not just external, it was internal. A descent into the psychological abyss of what had transpired and what it had done to me. The morning after I took back my house, I woke to a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the silence of being ignored or forgotten, the kind that used to settle in around me like fog, but the kind that hummed with clarity. I made a pot of coffee, the real kind, not the watered-down hotel stuff I'd grown used to in Reykjavik. I drank it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table Arthur once used to do homework on. My fingers traced the small etchings he'd carved when he was 8, a stick figure, a sun, the letter E. He used to call this place our home. Somewhere along the way, that became his house. Not anymore. Daniel arrived around 9 a.m., dressed in his usual navy suit, holding a manila folder thicker than a phone book. He set it on the counter, poured himself a cup of coffee without asking. We had that kind of history. And he said, "Today we draw the line." I nodded. We didn't need a speech. We just needed signatures. Together, we reviewed every document: the emergency order to revoke Arthur's temporary financial access property protections, filed with the county recorder, a revised will removing Arthur entirely, a durable power of attorney, assigned to my niece Chloe. When we reached the last page, Daniel handed me a pen. I held it for a moment, breathing in the weight of everything it symbolized. Then I signed, slowly, firmly. My name, Eleanor Vance, written in ink, not fear. "Is it enough?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked at me with something close to pride. "It's more than enough. You've got your voice back." The courthouse was quiet when we arrived. Just a few people waiting for early hearings. Nothing dramatic. No slamming gavels or echoing verdicts. Just paperwork, quiet steps, and the hum of printers churning out the truth. Arthur was already there. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, dressed like a man pretending not to be nervous. He stood when he saw me, forced a smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked him in the eye. Not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally stopped explaining herself. "No." He blinked. "Just 5 minutes." I turned away and entered the courtroom without another word. The hearing was brief. Daniel presented the case with clean facts. No theatrics, just dates, documents, patterns, all building the picture Arthur had tried to draw of me: forgetful, unstable, lost. The judge looked over the petition for power of attorney Arthur had filed 2 days after I landed in Reykjavik. She raised an eyebrow. "No medical documentation, no physician recommendation?" she asked. Arthur's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We believed there was enough anecdotal concern to act in good faith. The judge didn't buy it. She struck down the petition within 15 minutes, citing lack of evidence, signs of coercion, and abuse of process. She signed the restraining order renewal immediately after. Outside the courtroom, Arthur approached again. His face had changed. Not angry, not apologetic, just hollow. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I looked at him for what felt like the first time in years, past the adult exterior, past the guilt I'd worn like a second skin. And I said the truth. "Because this isn't yours to claim." He flinched. "You're my mother." I said, "and I gave everything I had. My time, my home, my name. And you used it all to build a version of me that served your goals, not my dignity." He stood there, stunned. I kept going. "You don't get to erase me, Arthur. You don't get to rewrite my story to make yours easier." He tried to speak. I didn't let him. "You made choices, and now I'm making mine." I walked past him, Daniel beside me, the echo of my heels steady on the courthouse floor. Back in the car, I exhaled so deeply it felt like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years. Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. Then softly, he muttered, "That boy just ran into a wall he never thought you'd build." I looked out the window at the city I'd lived in for 4 decades. The courthouse. The cafe on the corner where Thomas once proposed. The school Arthur used to run toward after class. So many memories. So much love. But now I finally understood. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. It didn't take long for the news to spread. A small town like Lake Haven doesn't let much stay secret, especially when it involves court orders, family betrayal, and the kind of quiet scandal that's just juicy enough to discuss at a book club, but painful enough to lower voices when my name comes up. I didn't have to say a word. People started asking questions on their own. It began with Evelyn, of course. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everything 3 minutes before it happened. She hadn't spoken a single word to Arthur since that day I called her from Reykjavik. So when she ran into Susan Miller at the post office, the same Susan whose daughter used to date Arthur in high school, she let it slip just once. Eleanor's back. She handled things. By the next day, Susan's daughter had posted something vague on Facebook. Some people don't realize who they're messing with until the paperwork shows up. No names, no context, but everyone knew. And then came the emails. 3 women from church reached out privately. One had noticed Arthur clearing out my china cabinet a week before I returned. Another remembered him mentioning how his mother was getting a little too tired to handle finances anymore. And the third, bless her soul, admitted she'd been invited to a small gathering at my home while I was supposedly on an extended retreat. And they all apologized. Not for what they did, but for what they didn't see. And I understood because for years I didn't see it either. I didn't see how slowly Arthur had been reshaping my image in the world's eyes. How subtly he'd been preparing everyone to doubt me. It wasn't just gaslighting, it was social groundwork. A kind of emotional laundering, turning strong into controlling, attentive, into overbearing, independent, into the confused. But now, people were remembering not just what he said, but who I'd always been. When the church's community bulletin came out, my name was listed again under the widow's circle with a note. "Welcome back, Eleanor." No fanfare, no pity, just a line that told me I wasn't invisible anymore. What hit harder was what wasn't said about Arthur. He showed up at Sunday's service the following week, alone, sat 2 pews back from his usual spot. No one turned him away, but no one greeted him either. No handshake, no smile, just polite nods and cool glances. Not cruel, just cold. I didn't attend that service. I didn't need to. Evelyn told me everything. He sat there like a stranger in his own house, she said. People didn't shun him. They just didn't see him anymore. I nodded. That was enough. Later that week, I went to the grocery store, the same store where the cashier used to ask, "How's your son?" every time I bought orange juice because Arthur loved it as a boy. This time, she scanned my items, looked up, and said, "You look good, Eleanor. Real good." It was the way she said it, like I had stepped out of a fog. Like she finally saw me again. Not as someone's mother, but as someone who survived. And in that moment, standing in the frozen aisle with a loaf of rye bread and a bag of decaf, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt restoration, not revenge, not satisfaction. Just the quiet return of what was mine, my place, my dignity, my name. The hook for the next chapter. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but familiar. Inside was a short note. "Mom, you made your point. I didn't think it would get this far. I guess I underestimated you. I hope someday you'll forgive me? Arthur." I folded the paper, once placed it in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, and went outside to water the roses. They'd started blooming again, brighter than I remembered. Funny how things grow when you stop begging them to. The immediate pain of the confrontation had faded, but the hollow space it left remained, demanding that I descend further into its depths. My internal landscape, much like the Arctic expanse of Reykjavik, felt vast and silent, filled with the echoes of a lost life and a fragile sense of self. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but familiar. Inside was a short note. "Mom, you made your point. I didn't think it would get this far. I guess I underestimated you. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Arthur." I folded the paper once, a precise, almost clinical movement, and placed it in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, a drawer filled with old birthday cards and faded photographs. Then I went outside to water the roses. They'd started blooming again, brighter than I remembered, their petals unfurling in defiant bursts of color. Funny how things grow when you stop begging them to. The immediate pain of the confrontation had faded, but the hollow space it left remained, demanding that I descend further into its depths. My internal landscape, much like the Arctic expanse of Reykjavik, felt vast and silent, filled with the echoes of a lost life and a fragile sense of self. The roses came in fuller that year. I don't know if it was the fertilizer Evelyn swore by or just the timing of things. How sometimes when a storm passes, even the ground sighs and begins again. I stood out there most mornings, just me, my gloves, and the pruning shears Thomas gave me on our last anniversary. The peace didn't come all at once. It came in layers, quiet ones. At first, I still jumped when the phone rang, still braced when the mail arrived, still hesitated before logging into my bank account. The fear, though muted, was a persistent echo, a low hum beneath the surface of my new fragile calm. But day by day, the fear softened, the edge dulled, and in its place grew something sturdier, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom, not the loud kind, not the throw-it-in-their-face kind, just the kind where you wake up and realize I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. I signed up for a watercolor class at the senior center. Something small. Tuesdays at 10 o'clock. The first day, I almost didn't go. I worried people would whisper. I worried someone would bring up Arthur or the court case, but they didn't. They just smiled, handed me a brush, and said, "Glad you made it." I hadn't painted in decades. Turns out, I still remembered how to blend blues. There's a stillness that comes when you create something just for yourself. Not for praise, not to prove a point, just because your hands need to move and your heart needs to rest. And funny enough, one of the women in class, a soft-spoken widow named Irene, asked me halfway through, "You live by the lake, don't you?" I nodded. She smiled. "I always thought that porch light of yours looked warm." Warm. The word landed harder than it should have, because for so long, I thought warmth meant letting everyone in, even the ones who chipped away at me, even the ones who left me stranded. But now I knew better. Warmth wasn't about being available. It was about being alive, truly vibrantly alive, even when no one's watching. A few weeks later, I hosted a book club at my house. First time in years. I set out lemon bars, made fresh tea, and dusted the shelves, each movement deliberate reclaiming. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't over-explain anything. And when someone tentatively asked, "So where's Arthur these days?" I simply said, "He's doing his own thing." And we moved on. No gasps, no gossip, just grace. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch with a blanket and looked out at the lake. The reflection of the moon danced on the water, a shimmering, broken path of light, and I thought, this is what healing looks like. Boring, beautiful, quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It just shows up and stays. Let me ask you something. Have you ever rebuilt your life without making noise? Just slowly, one tiny act of courage at a time. Getting out of bed, saying no without guilt, making soup for yourself on a Tuesday night because you deserve flavor. If you have, leave a comment. Not for attention, but because someone else scrolling through might need to know they're not alone. That starting over doesn't require fireworks, just breath, just time, and maybe a lemon bar or two. Evelyn came by the next morning with cuttings from her garden. She looked around and said, "Feels different in here." "It is," I said. "Are you lonely?" she asked. I smiled. "No, not anymore." And I meant it, because once you stop chasing acknowledgement and start standing in your own stillness, loneliness changes. It becomes solitude, a place where your thoughts don't echo in pain, but hum in peace. I didn't miss Arthur. I missed the boy he used to be, but even that grief had grown quieter now. No longer sharp, just a soft ache I carried like an old song I used to hum, but don't need to sing anymore. I started volunteering on Thursdays, reading to kids at the library. Funny how they listen without judgment. They just want stories. They don't care where you've been, what your son said, or how many times your voice cracked trying to defend yourself. They just listen. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all, being heard. Not because you fight for space, but because you've stopped apologizing for taking it. It was late spring when Arthur came by. I was trimming the lavender by the fence, my gloves stained with soil sun on my back, and that kind of breeze that only shows up in May. Just enough to remind you the world keeps moving, even if people don't. I didn't hear his car, just his voice. "Hi, Mom." I turned around slowly, still holding my shears. He looked different. Not older, just smaller, like life had humbled him in the places I never could. There was a weariness around his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not the result of stress, but of seeing himself clearly. He was holding a paper bag. "Thought I'd bring you lunch," he said. "That soup you used to like, the one with barley?" I didn't say anything. He stepped forward. "I know I should have called. I didn't think you'd answer anyway." He was right. I watched him set the bag down on the bench by the porch. He didn't try to hug me. Didn't reach for anything. Just stood there, like he knew the silence between us wasn't something you could fill with words. "I just wanted to say thank you." he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. For letting me be born to someone better than I ever deserved. That stopped me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time he'd said something without expecting an answer. I nodded once, just that. Then I turned back to the lavender. He didn't linger. Didn't ask to come in. Didn't ask for forgiveness. He just left the soup and walked back to his car. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I didn't replay his words all night like I used to. I just finished my trimming, washed my hands, and had a bowl of barley soup on the porch with my feet up, watching the sky soften into evening. You see, healing doesn't mean the story wraps up neatly. It means you no longer need it to. There's power in refusing to be pulled back into cycles, in knowing that just because someone shows up with better words doesn't mean you owe them anything. Sometimes growth is letting someone speak without needing to respond. Without anger, without softness, either just presence. Arthur's visit didn't change my life, but it confirmed something I already knew. I had nothing left to prove. He can live with what he did, and I can live with what I've become. The hook for the next chapter. The next day, I took the leftover soup to Evelyn's. We had lunch in her backyard while her cat chased bugs in the tall grass. I told her what happened. She didn't interrupt, just listened like she always did. When I was done, she nodded and said, "You're stronger than most women I know." I smiled. I'm just tired of explaining myself. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. Not for Arthur, not for Thomas, not for anyone who left, but for the version of me that had stayed through silence, through humiliation, through betrayal. She deserved the light. The faint glimmer of that candle, however, was just the beginning of a new awakening, a deeper understanding of the meticulous architects of my own future. The next day, I took the leftover soup to Evelyn's. We had lunch in her backyard while her cat chased bugs in the tall grass. I told her what happened. She didn't interrupt, just listened like she always did, her quiet presence a comforting anchor. When I was done, she nodded and said, "You're stronger than most women I know." I smiled. I'm just tired of explaining myself. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. Not for Arthur, not for Thomas, not for anyone who left, but for the version of me that had stayed through silence, through humiliation, through betrayal. She deserved the light. The faint glimmer of that candle, however, was just the beginning of a new awakening, a deeper understanding of the meticulous architects of my own future. I had the envelope ready for days before I dropped it off. A plain manila folder sealed carefully. No sticky notes or dramatic instructions. Just my new will notarized and witnessed tucked inside. My lawyer, Daniel, told me I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. "It's your estate, Eleanor," he said. "Not a group decision." He was right. I walked into the law office like I was going to the grocery store. No makeup, no fancy shoes, just me and years of knowing that gratitude should never have to be begged for. Daniel's assistant greeted me with a soft smile, took the folder, and handed me a receipt. That was it. 5 minutes. A quiet undoing of everything Arthur thought was guaranteed. Because the house, the Lake Haven lakefront property he used to brag about inheriting, that's going to Chloe, my niece, the one who visited, even when she didn't need anything. The savings account split between the local library and the children's hospital. Places that had no idea how much they'd helped me stay sane over the years. And the trust fund left in the name of a girl named Lena, the daughter of my former housekeeper, who once helped me shovel snow at 6 a.m. with bare hands and never asked for a dime more than she earned. I left Arthur nothing. Not to punish him, but to finally stop rewarding his silence, his arrogance, his assumption that love was owed and not earned. I thought about adding a letter, something gentle, something fair. But then I realized the absence is the letter. He'd open the will one day and find space where his name should have been. And that space would say everything. That's how I wanted to leave it. Some people think leaving someone out of your will is cruel. But to me, cruel was building a life around people who never once asked how you were really doing. Cruel was calling your mother a burden because she asked for help booking a flight. Cruel was standing in her living room, drinking champagne, thinking she was too far away to come back. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was clarity. That afternoon, I sat on my porch tea and hand lavender blooming at my feet, and I thought about how peace isn't always soft. Sometimes it looks like boundaries, like firm lines drawn in ink, and law and self-respect. I thought back to the early years when Arthur was little, and I used to whisper in his ear while he slept, "One day you'll understand what love costs." Maybe now he finally does, or maybe he never will. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. And I hope someone reading this, someone who spent years wondering if they're cruel for walking away, for drawing lines, for choosing silence over begging, hears me when I say, you are not cruel. You are wise. And wisdom often looks like walking out quietly, then locking the door behind you. I rocked gently on my porch swing as twilight settled over Lake Superior. The air cool but soft, carrying the scent of blooming roses and pine from the shore. Behind me, the lantern by the front door glowed golden, a beacon I'd returned after reclaiming everything that was mine. In the distance, children's laughter drifted up from the park, a reminder that life marches on even after you think it's been put on pause. For the first time in months, I felt no tremor in my chest. The world felt steady beneath my feet, and I let myself exhale. The rose garden, once neglected under the weight of betrayal, had thrived while I was away. Evelyn tended it in my absence, but I had pruned and fed every plant with my own hand since returning. Watching the buds unfurl now, I saw more than petals and thorns. I saw my own journey from brokenness into quiet strength. Each blossom was a testament to survival, how something beautiful can emerge from what almost killed it. I reached out to touch a pale pink bloom, its soft edge brushing my palm like an old friend. Below my notebook on the small wicker table lay the final draft of my new diary entry. Not pages full of sorrow or anger, but simple lines. I am not defined by what was taken from me. I am defined by what I have chosen to keep. My dignity, my peace, my light. I paused there, pen hovering, and thought of Arthur. I had expected fury when I first reclaimed my house. Instead, I found numb acceptance. Revenge might satisfy in stories, but in the end, it's self-respect that heals. I didn't need him to suffer. I only needed myself to stand. I thought back to the day I changed my will, removing his name without drama. Some might call that cruel, but I saw it as clarity, freeing both of us from a narrative neither of us deserved. That act wasn't about punishment. It was about honoring those who truly cared. Chloe, Lena, the children at the hospital, the library where I volunteered. They were the ones who never stopped seeing me. By the time I'd filed the papers, I realized that cutting ties on paper had already freed my heart. In the quiet of that porch, I reflected on what victory means. It isn't the clatter of court battles or the echoes of gavel strikes. It's the hush after the storm, the space to breathe without fear. It's painting roses in watercolor class even when no audience is watching. It's reading stories to giggling kids who don't know your history. It's sitting with a cup of chamomile tea and feeling grateful you can. I looked down at the notebook again and added one last sentence. Not because of revenge, but because of a love I refused to let die. I closed the cover, tucked the pen beside it, and let dusk seep into my skin. The lantern light flickered, and I recognized that glow wasn't just from a bulb. It was the light I'd saved for myself all along. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, turning off the lantern. The house behind me faded into silhouette, but the garden still glowed. The path to the street was softly lit by solar stakes I'd installed, each one marking a step I took back toward myself. I smiled, knowing that when morning came, I'd wake to another day of choice, another chance to tend the garden volunteer right, and simply be. Before I turned in for the night, I placed my hand over the first rose bush bent low and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, and to the little girl I once was, who dreamed of strong roots and open skies. She survived storms I could hardly imagine back then. And now, I lived in the calm she fought for. Sometimes the strongest thing we ever do is in silence, waking up and choosing not to call the person who hurt us, cooking a warm meal just for ourselves, or simply deciding to keep going when no one's watching. That's what this story was about. Not revenge in fire and fury, but a quiet kind of reclamation. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever rebuilt your life piece by piece after being overlooked, abandoned, or underestimated? Maybe it was after your children stopped visiting. Maybe it was when you were called a burden or when someone you loved forgot your worth. Whatever your moment was, I see you. I know it wasn't easy, but you did something brave even if no one else noticed. I'd love if you shared one small act of quiet courage you took to reclaim your dignity. Maybe you moved out. Maybe you stopped answering certain calls. Maybe you started gardening again. Whatever it was, leave it in the comments. Not for sympathy, but so others who are still in their storm can see that peace is possible. Your story matters. The hook for the next chapter. The finality of the will, the quiet reshaping of my future, had been a necessary step. But now, as the quiet spring days turned into warm summer evenings, a different kind of architectural work began. It wasn't about legal documents or physical boundaries. It was about rebuilding the internal landscape meticulously, planning the final, most crucial stages of this journey. The whispers of vengeance, no longer a desperate plea, transformed into the strategic blueprint for a self-forged future. This was not a plan for external destruction, but for internal liberation. The finality of the will, the quiet reshaping of my future, had been a necessary step. But now, as the quiet spring days turned into warm summer evenings, a different kind of architectural work began. It wasn't about legal documents or physical boundaries. It was about rebuilding the internal landscape meticulously, planning the final, most crucial stages of this journey. The whispers of vengeance, no longer a desperate plea, transformed into the strategic blueprint for a self-forged future. This was not a plan for external destruction, but for internal liberation. I found solace in routine. Mornings began with the scent of blooming roses and freshly brewed coffee, a quiet ritual of reclaiming my senses. I spent hours in the garden, pruning and tending each snipped stem, a small act of control over what was mine. The rose bushes, now vibrant and full, offered a quiet lesson. Even after being neglected, after being thought dead, beauty could still unfurl. Evelyn would often join me, her cheerful chatter, a welcome counterpoint to my more introspective silence. We talked about anything and everything, new recipes, local gossip, the changing seasons, carefully avoiding any mention of Arthur, a silent mutual agreement. My watercolor class became a sanctuary. The soft swish of brush on paper, the gentle blending of colors, filled a space within me I hadn't realized was empty. Irene, my fellow widow, often complimented my blending of blues, a small, genuine kindness that meant more than grand declarations. It was in these quiet moments, surrounded by the unassuming artistry of others, that the true blueprint for my future began to take shape. It wasn't about punishing Arthur, not anymore. That act was done, sealed with ink and law. This was about building something new for myself, a life so undeniably mine that no one could ever try to dismantle it again. I began to categorize my thoughts, almost like Daniel organized his legal files. What did reclamation truly mean? It wasn't just physical possession of my house or financial security. It was the reclaiming of my time, my energy, my emotional landscape. It was the meticulous construction of boundaries, invisible lines drawn around my peace. I scheduled regular meetings with Daniel not to discuss Arthur, but to discuss my future. He helped me set up new investment accounts, advised on property management, and even recommended a financial planner who specialized in retirement and legacy planning. This was about fortification, about making my future unassailable. The internal monologue became constant, a quiet hum of self-reflection. I thought revenge would heal me, but instead I just felt emptier. The initial surge of righteous anger had served its purpose, pushing me forward, giving me the strength to act. But it wasn't sustainable. It was too corrosive. The true healing lay not in what I took from Arthur, but in what I gave back to myself. I revisited old journals, faded entries from before Thomas passed, before Arthur's birth. I saw a younger Eleanor, full of quiet dreams and a fierce independence that had slowly been buried under layers of maternal sacrifice. The blueprint wasn't just forward-looking. It was a re-excavation of self. I started making lists. Not to-do lists, but to-be lists. Be present, be heard, be valued. I volunteered more at the library, finding deep satisfaction in the simple act of reading stories to children, their uncritical attention a balm. They didn't care about my past, my betrayals, or my scars. They just wanted the story. And I, for the first time in a long time, was truly present to tell it. The calls from Susan Miller, the neighbor who had spread the word about my return, became less about gossip and more about genuine connection. We'd meet for coffee, and I found myself sharing carefully, thoughtfully bits of my journey. It wasn't about seeking sympathy, but about finding community, building new bridges where old ones had crumbled. These small, consistent acts of self-care and self-assertion were the bricks in my new foundation. Arthur's brief, quiet visit with the barley soup had been a poignant reminder that while he might be on his own path of realization, my path was irrevocably separate. His apology, though belated, didn't erase the past, nor did it demand an immediate reconciliation. It simply existed, a quiet echo in the larger symphony of my rebuilding. The blueprint for my life was no longer reactive, no longer defined by someone else's actions. It was proactive. It was deliberate. It was mine. The hook for the next chapter. The blueprint was complete. The quiet planning, the internal fortifications, all culminated in a series of deliberate actions designed not to inflict pain, but to secure my peace. The first strike wouldn't be a dramatic outburst, but a calm, resolute step into the new life I was building. It would be a confrontation, not with Arthur, but with the lingering shadows of the past, marking the official beginning of my new dawn. The blueprint was complete. The quiet planning, the internal fortifications, all culminated in a series of deliberate actions designed not to inflict pain, but to secure my peace. The first strike wouldn't be a dramatic outburst, but a calm, resolute step into the new life I was building. It would be a confrontation not with Arthur, but with the lingering shadows of the past, marking the official beginning of my new dawn. I began with the small things, the daily choices that asserted my newfound autonomy. My morning walks by Lake Superior became longer, more purposeful. I discovered new trails winding through dense pine forests, the scent of earth and evergreen filling my lungs. I often paused by the water's edge, watching the waves lap gently against the shore, a rhythm of consistent, unwavering presence. It was a stark contrast to the turbulent waters of my recent past. My involvement at the library deepened. I started a small book club for the older children, choosing stories that celebrated courage and quiet rebellion. One afternoon, a timid girl no older than 10 confided in me about a bully at school. I listened, truly listened, offering not advice, but a safe space, a quiet validation of her feelings. It was a profound difference from the way my own concerns had been dismissed. These interactions, small as they were, felt like bricks in the foundation of my reclaimed self. The real first strike, however, was less about direct confrontation and more about strategic visibility. I knew Arthur was still living in the area, likely keeping a low profile, avoiding the social whispers that had begun to circulate. His brief visit with the soup had been a flicker of that awareness. My plan was simple: to exist fully and vibrantly in the spaces he once thought he owned, without acknowledging his presence. The first public event I chose was the annual Lake Haven Summer Festival. It was a local tradition, a gathering of the entire community, held on the town green. In years past, I would attend with Thomas, and later, sometimes with Arthur, always feeling like part of a unit. This year, I went alone, but not lonely. Evelyn met me there, her arm linked through mine, a silent declaration of solidarity. Chloe, my niece, and Lena, her bright eyes alight with the joy of the crowd, joined us later. As we walked through the bustling fairgrounds, the scent of popcorn and grilled brats mingling with the sweet perfume of summer flowers, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I chatted with neighbors, exchanged pleasantries with old acquaintances, my smile genuine, my laughter unforced. I bought a hand-painted ceramic bird from a local artist, a small, vibrant thing, a symbol of my freedom. I savored an ice cream cone, letting the cold sweetness melt on my tongue, truly present in the moment. And then I saw him, Arthur. He stood by the main stage, where a local band was playing folk music, his back mostly to us. He was alone, hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't interacting. He was simply there, a solitary figure amidst the joyous crowd. The cold LED light from my house, I realized, was now the stark reality of his public isolation. I felt a flicker of something. Not pity, not triumph, but a quiet, almost clinical observation. He looked smaller, just as he had when he came to the house with the soup. The arrogance that had once cloaked him seemed to have withered, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. He shifted his weight, checked his phone, then looked around, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. For a moment, his eyes met mine. It was fleeting, a mere second, but in that sliver of time, I saw it: recognition followed by a jolt of shock, then a quick aversion. He hadn't expected to see me. Not here. Not like this. Not vibrant and surrounded by quiet, supportive warmth. He probably expected me to be at home, perhaps still reeling from the court proceedings, a shrunken, silent figure. But I was not. I was standing tall. I didn't flinch. I didn't acknowledge him with a nod or a cold stare. I simply maintained my gaze for that split second, then turned my attention back to the band, to Evelyn, to Chloe and Lena. My laughter, when it came, was genuine, carrying on the summer breeze. It wasn't a performance. It was my life lived openly, authentically. That was the first strike. Not a word exchanged. No angry accusations. Just presence. Just the undeniable reality of my vibrant existence in a space he thought he had cleared for his own narrative. The hook for the next chapter. The summer days continued, each one a testament to my renewed strength. Arthur, it seemed, had retreated further into the shadows, his attempts to erase me now completely undone. But the unraveling of his grand scheme was far from over. There were still threads to pull, deeper secrets to expose, not just about his machinations, but about the very foundations of his perceived power. The next steps would be quieter, more insidious, designed to expose the truth to those who still chose to look away and force Arthur to truly face the consequences of his betrayal. The summer days continued, each one a testament to my renewed strength. Arthur, it seemed, had retreated further into the shadows, his attempts to erase me now completely undone. But the unraveling of his grand scheme was far from over. There were still threads to pull, deeper secrets to expose, not just about his machinations, but about the very foundations of his perceived power. The next steps would be quieter, more insidious, designed to expose the truth to those who still chose to look away and force Arthur to truly face the consequences of his betrayal. My conversations with Daniel became more frequent, but less about defense and more about setting my own course. We established a charitable foundation in Thomas's name, dedicated to supporting local arts and literacy programs. A portion of the funds would come from the savings account Arthur had sought to claim, now legally protected and redirected. This wasn't about punitive measures. It was about repurposing what was mine for good. It was about building a legacy of genuine contribution, directly contrasting Arthur's pursuit of selfish gain. The community, too, played its part in the unraveling subtly but surely. Evelyn, with her network of garden club friends and church ladies, was a quiet force. She never overtly gossiped, but her casual remarks, framed as observations or concerns, carried immense weight. "Isn't it odd," she might murmur to a mutual acquaintance, "how Arthur never mentions his mother's travel dreams anymore? She used to talk about Iceland for years. Or, I saw the new lights on Eleanor's porch. So bright, not like the soft, welcoming glow she always kept for Thomas." These seemingly innocent comments sparked questions, sowing seeds of doubt about Arthur's narrative. Then came the quiet discovery. Chloe, always meticulous, was helping me sort through old tax documents. Buried deep within a stack of papers related to Thomas's estate, we found an unsigned, undated legal document. It was a prenuptial agreement drafted years ago outlining Arthur's mother-in-law's substantial debts and a clause requiring a significant down payment on a new family home, a payment that, according to the document, was contingent on a sudden influx of capital. It was a chilling revelation, suggesting a deeper, more desperate motive behind Arthur's actions than mere greed. He wasn't just after my money for his own comfort. He was under pressure, potentially coerced by his wife's family, to secure funds they desperately needed. I sat there, the crumpled paper in my hand, the words blurring. This wasn't a sudden burst of compassion for Arthur. It was a new layer to the truth, a glimpse into the complex web of desperation that sometimes drives people to unthinkable acts. It didn't excuse his betrayal, but it offered a heartbreaking context. "No one is completely bad," Daniel had said once, a quiet wisdom I was only now beginning to truly understand. This discovery, this unexpected twist, added a grim layer of nuance to Arthur's actions. He was still the architect of my pain, but perhaps he was also, in a twisted way, a victim of his own circumstances, entangled in a financial snare that pushed him to such extremes. I didn't share this discovery widely. It wasn't about public shaming. This revelation was for me a piece of the puzzle that allowed me to understand, not forgive, but understand. It solidified my resolve to protect what was mine, not just from Arthur, but from the broader forces that might have influenced him. My actions were no longer purely reactive. They were informed by a deeper, more complex understanding of the human condition, even in its darkest forms. The quiet unraveling continued. Local charities, alerted by Daniel's office to my new foundation, began to quietly refuse any donations from Arthur or his wife, citing ethical alignment issues. Whispers through the professional community, subtle but damaging, began to circulate about his unconventional business practices and questionable family ethics. No direct accusations, just enough smoke to suggest a fire. Arthur found himself subtly ostracized, losing clients, his professional reputation quietly eroding, not through my direct action, but through the natural consequence of his own choices exposed to the light. The hook for the next chapter, the external unraveling of Arthur's life, however quiet, was a prelude to a far more profound process for me. With the clearer picture of his desperation, a new, unsettling reflection began to emerge. As I saw the brokenness in him, I was forced to confront the brokenness within myself. The fear, the enabling, the unspoken sacrifices that had, in their own way, contributed to the very scenario I was now escaping. The mirror was turning not just on him, but on me, demanding an honest, painful confrontation with my own reflection. The external unraveling of Arthur's life, however quiet, was a prelude to a far more profound process for me. With the clearer picture of his desperation, A new, unsettling reflection began to emerge. As I saw the brokenness in him, I was forced to confront the brokenness within myself. The fear, the enabling, the unspoken sacrifices that had in their own way contributed to the very scenario I was now escaping. The mirror was turning not just on him, but on me, demanding an honest, painful confrontation with my own reflection. I started spending more time alone, not out of loneliness, but out of necessity. The quiet of my lake house, once a comfort, now felt like a crucible. I would sit by the window, watching the endless expanse of Lake Superior, its surface mirroring the vast, often turbulent depths of my own mind. I picked up an old, leather-bound journal, one I hadn't touched since Thomas passed its pages filled with hurried notes, anxieties, and the raw, unfiltered emotions of a young widow trying to navigate a new world. Rereading those entries, I saw a familiar pattern, my tendency to prioritize the needs and perceived happiness of others above my own. My silent acceptance of Thomas's quiet aloofness, chalking it up to his nature. My fierce, almost desperate need to be seen as a good mother, which often translated into endless sacrifice and a fear of setting boundaries. He needs me, I'd often written, or I must ensure his future. These weren't just thoughts. They were commandments etched into my very being. And then I saw the chilling parallel. Arthur, in his desperation, had mirrored my own silent sacrifices, but twisted them for selfish gain. My endless giving had perhaps taught him that he only needed to take. My fear of confrontation had shown him that he could manipulate without immediate consequence. My quiet determination to build his future had inadvertently set the stage for him to believe my future was his for the taking. The realization was a sharp, brutal ache in my chest. He wasn't just a betrayer. He was a distorted reflection of my own past self, the part of me that had erased Eleanor to become Mom. The judge's words from the hearing echoed in my mind. Lack of evidence, signs of coercion and abuse of process. While she spoke of Arthur's actions, I realized those words resonated with my own life. Had I not in a way coerced myself into a life of self-erasure? Had I not abused my own emotional process by constantly prioritizing others' needs? The mirror, once a tool for physical appearance, now reflected a deeper, more unsettling truth about the landscape of my soul. I found myself revisiting memories not with anger, but with a new critical lens. The time Arthur as a teenager had accidentally spent my vacation savings on a new gaming console, and I had simply sighed and said, "Boys will be boys." The countless Mother's Day brunches he canceled always with a plausible excuse while I quietly ate alone. I had dismissed these as minor flaws as part of the complexities of parenting. Now I saw them as early tremors, small cracks in the foundation of trust, cracks I had papered over with forgiveness and a boundless, often misguided love. The true cruelty wasn't just Arthur's actions, but my own complicity in allowing them to fester. Not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated fear of being unloved, of being a burden. I had become what he later accused me of being, exhausted by worry susceptible to manipulation. It was a difficult truth to swallow. The victory in the courtroom, the reclaiming of my home, had been necessary. But the deeper work, the true reflection, was far more painful. This confrontation with my own shadow self was quiet, internal, but as intense as any courtroom battle. It was the mirror arc in its purest form, seeing my own reflection distorted and amplified in the very person who had caused me so much pain. It wasn't about blame, but about understanding the complex interplay of choices that had led us both to this desolate place. I looked at the vast, still lake, and for the first time, I felt a tremor of something akin to empathy for Arthur. Not for what he did, but for the brokenness that must have driven him. A brokenness I now realized in some small, uncomfortable way I had inadvertently nurtured. The hook for the next chapter. The realization of my own complicity, however unintentional, was a bitter pill. But it was also liberating. It stripped away the last vestiges of victimhood, replacing it with a quiet, uncomfortable empowerment. The mirror had shown me the truth, and now the arduous, solitary process of reconciling with that truth began. This wasn't about forgiving Arthur. It was about forgiving myself for the years of silent sacrifice, for the subtle erasure of Eleanor. It was about rebuilding the internal bridge to my true self, one painful, necessary step at a time. The realization of my own complicity, however unintentional, was a bitter pill. But it was also liberating. It stripped away the last vestiges of victimhood, replacing it with a quiet, uncomfortable empowerment. The mirror had shown me the truth, and now the arduous, solitary process of reconciling with that truth began. This wasn't about forgiving Arthur. It was about forgiving myself for the years of silent sacrifice, for the subtle erasure of Eleanor. It was about rebuilding the internal bridge to my true self, one painful, necessary step at a time. I started to differentiate between healthy boundaries and self-imposed limitations. For so long, I had believed that being a good mother, a good wife, meant saying yes to every demand, sacrificing every personal desire. This had ironically made me a blank canvas onto which others could project their needs, and in Arthur's case, his greed. I began a new ritual: daily journaling, but this time the entries weren't about external events or Arthur's actions. They were about my feelings, my needs, my long-suppressed desires. It was a slow, sometimes agonizing excavation. One entry stands out. I gave him my name, my home, my time. But I forgot to keep a piece of myself. The words, stark and honest, were a testament to the pain of self-betrayal. I remembered countless times I'd canceled a pottery class or a quiet afternoon with a book because Arthur needed me for something. Always something. And I, in my eagerness to be needed, always acquiesced. I had, in essence, trained him to see me as a resource, not a person. The reconciliation with myself was not a sudden burst of forgiveness, but a gradual unfolding. It involved acknowledging the fear that had driven so much of my past behavior, the fear of being alone after Thomas died, the fear of Arthur's disappointment, the fear of not being enough. This fear had been a powerful, silent manipulator in my own life, twisting my generosity into enabling. I revisited old photos, flipping through albums I hadn't opened in years. Pictures of a young Eleanor, vibrant and adventurous before the weight of expectations settled upon her shoulders. I saw a spark in her eyes that had dimmed over the decades. My task now was to rekindle that spark, not just for myself, but for the legacy I wanted to leave. It wasn't about being a victim who survived. It was about being a woman who thrived, not despite her scars, but because of the wisdom they had imparted. The process of reconciliation was painful, but necessary for growth. I allowed myself to feel the sadness for the lost years, the quiet rage for the self-denial. But I didn't linger there. Instead, I channeled those emotions into action. I signed up for more art classes, venturing beyond watercolors to explore acrylics, embracing the bold, unyielding colors. I joined a hiking group exploring the vast, breathtaking beauty of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, feeling the strength of my own body carrying me forward, not away from something, but towards a new horizon. I started taking active steps to build the foundation for the charities I had established with Daniel. I met with the library director discussing literacy programs for underserved children. I visited the children's hospital, moved by the resilience of the young patients. This wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving my time, my experience, my newly reclaimed energy to causes that resonated deeply with the Eleanor I was becoming. It was about defining my worth, not by external validation, but by internal purpose. The internal monologues became less about past regrets and more about future intentions. I will not be erased. I will not be defined by what was taken. I will define what I choose to keep. This was the true reconciliation. Accepting the past, acknowledging my role in it, and then with clear eyes and a steady heart, choosing a different path forward. The mirror now reflected not a broken woman, but one who was diligently, painstakingly putting herself back together stronger and more whole than before. The hook for the next chapter. The journey of self-reconciliation was ongoing, a quiet victory waged within the confines of my own mind. My life had undeniably transformed, yet the scars remained faint, but visible, reminding me of the crucible through which I had passed. This new chapter wasn't about erasing the past, but integrating it, allowing the echoes of what was lost to inform the profound lessons I had gained. My life was beginning anew, not with a bang, but with the quiet dignity of hard-won wisdom. The journey of self-reconciliation was ongoing, a quiet victory waged within the confines of my own mind. My life had undeniably transformed, yet the scars remained faint, but visible, reminding me of the crucible through which I had passed. This new chapter wasn't about erasing the past, but integrating it, allowing the echoes of what was lost to inform the profound lessons I had gained. My life was beginning anew, not with a bang, but with the quiet dignity of hard-won wisdom. The rhythms of my days settled into a comfortable, self-directed flow. Mornings were for the garden, its vibrant life, a testament to consistent care. The roses bloomed with an intensity I hadn't seen in years, their petals a symphony of pinks and reds against the deep green leaves. Each morning, as I pruned and watered, I thought of Evelyn, her unwavering support, a quiet strength. The physical act of nurturing the earth mirrored the internal nurturing I was giving myself. My watercolor class continued, a small, vibrant pocket of peace in my week. I found joy in the simple act of creating without expectation or judgment. Irene, my soft-spoken friend, and I often stayed late sharing stories of our lives, two quiet women finding solace in shared experience. The laughter came easier now, a genuine, unburdened sound. It was the sound of a spirit unclenching, of a heart slowly, steadily opening again. The community's quiet recognition of my strength continued to unfold. At the grocery store, the cashier, instead of asking about Arthur, now simply said, "You look good, Eleanor, real good." It was the way she said it, a tone of quiet acknowledgement, as if I had indeed stepped out of a fog. I was no longer someone's mother or someone's past. I was simply Eleanor, seen and acknowledged for who I was becoming. This subtle shift, the quiet return of my own name, my own place, my own dignity, resonated deeper than any grand victory. The letter from Arthur, tucked away in my drawer, remained untouched. I didn't need to reread it. Its message, the faint acknowledgement of his miscalculation, was now simply a part of the past, a lingering echo. I understood his plea for forgiveness, but forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something to be granted on demand. It was a complex personal journey, one he had to embark on himself. My focus was on my own journey, my own peace. My volunteering at the library brought unexpected gifts. The children, with their boundless curiosity and uncritical acceptance, offered a profound sense of being heard. They didn't care about my past, my son, or how my voice might have cracked in defense. They simply listened. This unburdened attention was a balm, a quiet affirmation that I had space, and that my voice mattered simply because I chose to use it. There were still moments, however, when the scar made itself known. A fleeting thought of Arthur, perhaps triggered by a familiar song or a certain scent, would bring a soft ache. Not the sharp, debilitating pain of before, but a muted, almost melancholic throb. It was like an old song I used to hum but didn't need to sing anymore. This lingering echo wasn't a sign of unhealed wounds, but of a life lived fully, a history that, however painful, had shaped the resilient woman I was now. I embraced the quiet. The porch swing became my sanctuary, the gentle creak of the chains a soothing rhythm. I watched the twilight settle over the lake, the moon's reflection dancing on the water, and understood that healing wasn't about a dramatic performance. It was about showing up quietly, consistently, and simply staying. It was about rebuilding my life piece by piece without making noise. Each gentle breeze, each rustle of leaves, each glimmer of moonlight on the water was a testament to the new peace that settled around me. The hook for the next chapter. The path I had chosen, built on self-respect and quiet courage, had led me to a profound sense of internal freedom. Yet the journey was not a closed loop. It stretched forward, inviting new dawns, new choices, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to live without regret. The lingering echoes of the past had softened, but the future beckoned, promising an unfolding of spirit, a new kind of wisdom that transcended mere survival. The path I had chosen, built on self-respect and quiet courage, had led me to a profound sense of internal freedom. Yet the journey was not a closed loop. It stretched forward, inviting new dawns, new choices, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to live without regret. The lingering echoes of the past had softened, but the future beckoned, promising an unfolding of spirit, a new kind of wisdom that transcended mere survival. I rocked gently on my porch swing as twilight settled over Lake Superior. The air was cool but soft, carrying the scent of blooming roses and pine from the shore. Behind me, the lantern by the front door glowed golden, a beacon I'd returned to after reclaiming everything that was mine. In the distance, children's laughter drifted up from the park, a reminder that life marches on even after you think it's been put on pause. For the first time in months, I felt no tremor in my chest. The world felt steady beneath my feet, and I let myself exhale. The rose garden, once neglected under the weight of betrayal, had thrived while I was away. Evelyn tended it in my absence, but I had pruned and fed every plant with my own hand since returning. Watching the buds unfurl now, I saw more than petals and thorns. I saw my own journey from brokenness into quiet strength. Each blossom was a testament to survival. How something beautiful can emerge from what almost killed it. I reached out to touch a pale pink bloom, its soft edge brushing my palm like an old friend. Below my notebook on the small wicker table lay the final draft of my new diary entry. Not pages full of sorrow or anger, but simple lines. I am not defined by what was taken from me. I am defined by what I have chosen to keep. My dignity, my peace, my light. I paused there, pen hovering, and thought of Arthur. I had expected fury when I first reclaimed my house. Instead, I found numb acceptance. Revenge might satisfy in stories, but in the end, it's self-respect that heals. I didn't need him to suffer. I only needed myself to stand. I thought back to the day I changed my will, removing his name without drama. Some might call that cruel, but I saw it as clarity, freeing both of us from a narrative neither of us deserved. That act wasn't about punishment. It was about honoring those who truly cared. Chloe, Lena, the children at the hospital, the library where I volunteered. They were the ones who never stopped seeing me. By the time I'd filed the papers, I realized that cutting ties on paper had already freed my heart. In the quiet of that porch, I reflected on what victory means. It isn't the clatter of court battles or the echoes of gavel strikes. It's the hush after the storm, the space to breathe without fear. It's painting roses in watercolor class, even when no audience is watching. It's reading stories to giggling kids who don't know your history. It's sitting with a cup of chamomile tea and feeling grateful you can. I looked down at the notebook again and added one last sentence. Not because of revenge, but because of a love I refused to let die. I closed the cover, tucked the pen beside it, and let dusk seep into my skin. The lantern light flickered, and I recognized that glow wasn't just from a bulb. It was the light I'd saved for myself all along. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, turning off the lantern. The house behind me faded into silhouette, but the garden still glowed. The path to the street was softly lit by solar stakes I'd installed, each one marking a step I took back toward myself. I smiled, knowing that when morning came, I'd wake to another day of choice, another chance to tend the garden, volunteer right, and simply be. Before I turned in for the night, I placed my hand over the first rosebush, bent low, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, and to the little girl I once was, who dreamed of strong roots and open skies. She survived storms I could hardly imagine back then. And now, I lived in the calm she fought for. Sometimes the strongest thing we ever do is in silence, waking up and choosing not to call the person who hurt us, cooking a warm meal just for ourselves, or simply deciding to keep going when no one's watching. That's what this story was about. Not revenge and fire and fury, but a quiet kind of reclamation. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever rebuilt your life piece by piece after being overlooked, abandoned, or underestimated? Maybe it was after your children stopped visiting. Maybe it was when you were called a burden, or when someone you loved forgot your worth. Whatever your moment was, I see you. I know it wasn't easy, but you did something brave even if no one else noticed. I'd love if you shared one small act of quiet courage you took to reclaim your dignity. Maybe you moved out. Maybe you stopped answering certain calls. Maybe you started gardening again. Whatever it was, leave it in the comments. Not for sympathy, but so others who are still in their storm can see that peace is possible. Your story matters.